Hello and welcome to Sam Not So Wise. My name is Sam. It is now April, so it's time to wrap up what I read in March as usual. So March was yet another lean month, unfortunately, in terms of my personal reading. And that is basically because university is absolutely whooping my ass. Now we are getting towards the end of term, so things are really ramping up in terms of assignments and exams and stuff like that. So for example, on Monday I have 2 exams, on Tuesday I have 2 exams, I have an essay in for Monday, I have a small assignment in for Monday as well. So basically all I'm doing at the moment is studying and working and just getting a little bit of reading in when I get the chance. I'm not complaining, it's really interesting and I'm enjoying it, but my reading time is down. So after Tuesday though, I do have a few more exams, but they're a lot more spread out, so I should be able to read a lot more for pleasure and hopefully get some bloody sleep. If you can't hear, I am still ill. I'm probably more ill than I was last week. It's just not going away because I don't have time to rest. So anyway, I finished 3 books in the month of March and I've got 1 DNF kind of. It's a bit of a weird story, so I'll tell you about that later as well. So I'll talk about those 3 books. My university reads, there's quite a few of them in this one, the short stories that I've been reading, and my TBR for April. So excuse me as there might be some more breaks in this video, more than usual, which is usually a lot because I might need to stop to cough just like now. So with that and much further ado, let's talk about March. So the first book that I finished in March was Shift, the second book in the Silo trilogy by Hugh Howey. So I read Wool last month, I think, which was a solid start to the series. Nothing groundbreaking, but an entertaining and easy read, and something I would recommend if you're into post-apocalyptic fiction. Now this book kind of continued in a similar vein in a way. It was somewhat predictable and nothing really too exciting going on with things such as prose or thematic work. It's there, but it's not exactly, breaking any molds. But it's a solid book with some emotional beats and interesting sci-fi concepts, again, especially if you are interested in post-apocalyptic. There's also some interesting moral conversations about kind of deciding humanity's future, humanity's fate, and who gets to decide these big questions that are posed in the book, and how you get to kind of moralize the destruction of a lot of people to potentially save the future. I obviously can't really talk much about the plot because it is a book 2 and that will give away stuff for book 1, but this is actually a prequel novel. So the second book in the series being a prequel, I don't think that's very normal. So that was kind of fun and interesting way to do the series. And it focuses on basically what leads up to the decision to build these massive silos, the early days and the issues that they faced in making them, and the lead up to the events in book 1. So basically, overall, this was a good, solid book, nothing mind-blowing. And it's just an easy read, really, quite nice and easy to breeze through. And I'll be definitely reading book 3 soon, as you'll find out later in the video. So the next book I finished was another book 2, and that is The Wall of Storms by Ken Liu, the second book in the Dandelion Dynasty. And this is a big, chunky boy. It's 850 pages of dense fantasy. So that's another reason why I didn't read so many books in terms of numbers, because this is big and it is dense. So I read book 1 last month and I enjoyed it a lot. But I wanted a bit of a change. I wanted this one to kind of narrow down the story, slow down a bit and reduce the exposition, which is mostly what I got. So I was a very happy chappy. Again, it's a book 2, so I can't really go into depth that much. But what kind of surprised me going into this, not really knowing what it's going to be about, is it's kind of a book of 2 halves. So the first half, we explore the world at a time of kind of lasting peace, at least, relatively within this world, because book 1 is basically just a whole book of war. And it's an exploration on social reform with an impetus on the improvement of education and equality to some extent. We also get the building of character as new people are introduced who will likely be big players in the future of this series. Furthermore, there is some serious political maneuvering going on in the first half of this book. Plenty to, keep people who love the politics of series such as Song of Ice and Fire happy. The political scheming is absolutely marvelous in this book. In the second half, there's kind of just like a bam! Out of nowhere, there is this huge kind of twist-ish, which just completely turns the world on its head and plunges us into a war. So it's the end of that kind of long-lasting piece. I won't tell you how, because that is a good surprise for you. Although the blurb of the book does kind of give it away, which kind of annoys me a little bit. But anyway, what follows is a series of military movements, and action is increased because of that. All whilst these themes that we were exploring before of like increasing learning and engineering and social progress are still, the wheels of these things are still turning in the background and infecting how the people who are being invaded are thinking about the war. And these innovations are used to kind of, advance their part of the war. And here we get a kind of a return to the previous style of large swaths, I don't know how you say that word, of exposition as we learn about this event and why it's going on. But, it's weaved into the book really well, and I actually do enjoy a lot of exposition. I just thought the first book was just too exposition heavy, so I wasn't sad to get, more information and learn more about this world. Ken Liu is really good at exposition. One thing I'll say for Ken Liu, which kind of harkens back to A Song of Ice and Fire again, is that he is quite a cruel man. Like, he really isn't afraid to kill off main characters, huge characters who have been there from the very start. Also new ones who you think are going to be big players. He will just kill them off, and it happens a lot. It's never gratuitous though, it's never just done there for shock value. It always feels realistic. These books are kind of based on Chinese history, so he has like something that he can take from that is realistic, and it does feel like this would actually happen in these kind of times of war. Overall, I thought this was a big step up from book one, which was already a really good book. So I really enjoyed this second book in the series. So what I loved were kind of just still the freshness of this world. It feels fresh, and its associated storytelling, the depth of the world as well. This is a deep, well thought out world, and Liu's portrayal of it is beautiful. We have absolutely fascinating characters who feel kind of simultaneously larger than life, but also believable. There's a lot of thematic exploration in this book and in this series, such as the importance of education, as I mentioned, improvements in equality, engineering genius as being kind of akin to magic, despotism and the difficulty of opposing it, great sacrifices, Stockholm Syndrome, and just many more. This is a highly thematic book. So the next book was the DNF kind of one. So as you may already know, I run a book club here in Reykjavik, an in-person book club that I've been running for a few years now. And the book that was chosen for our last meeting was The Dinosaur Lords. Now, I think this was kind of a semi-joke pick. So what I do is I give three people a choice to put a book up for vote. And this person put this one up because it kind of sounded funny, but it also had like a recommendation from George R.R. Martin. Not that that means anything these days, but it got voted for, so we read this. So I started reading this book. It was really difficult. I wasn't enjoying it at all. And then at some point I realized I was talking to my wife. We were kind of talking about it a bit, and like things weren't really connecting. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, and you don't know what I'm talking about. What is going on? And it turned out we weren't reading the same book. So you can't get this book on Kindle UK, which is where I get my Kindle books from. So, but you can get it on Storytel in Iceland, and on Storytel, when you download it, you can get the audio and the ebook. So I was reading that ebook. She downloaded it for me, but she accidentally downloaded the wrong book. She downloaded the second book, but weirdly it did say book 1 in the Dinosaur Lord series. So it's like a understandable mistake. But I was reading book 2 and she was reading book 1. But for me, this was just like an excuse to just like, well, obviously I was going to stop reading that one, but I wasn't going to start the first book either because I just wasn't enjoying it at all. And guess what? Nobody in book club liked it at all. I don't want to be overly harsh, but I found the prose to be kind of odd, like trying to be high and mighty and then really childish at the same time. It just didn't really make sense to me, didn't have a good flow. The world was very derivative. The characterization was quite shallow. The dialogue was cringy. There was lots of kind of weird sex stuff. I found the story boring. And you know what? There just wasn't enough dinosaurs. I was promised dinosaurs. Where were the dinosaurs? So this was a rare DNF for me, and I was quite happy to not be reading it anymore. So the third and final book that I finished in the month of March was Beloved by Toni Morrison. Now, this was a tough read for two reasons. One, just the content of the book, but also the writing style. I kind of wish I'd read this like a month later, just because, you know, I've been so busy that I really couldn't like fully concentrate on it as much as the book really deserves. This isn't a book that you can kind of just pick up every now and then and read for 20 minutes when you squeeze it in, which is basically what I was doing. But I wanted to read it because it felt appropriate because of what I've been studying at school. I've been studying a lot of American history, and I've been learning a lot more about the slave trade, and also reading books written by Americans around this time and around this topic. So it felt really, you know, just the appropriate time to read it. But I will have to go back to it because there were times that I just couldn't concentrate as much as I should have. You know, this book deserves that. But I pushed through and I finished it, and I can always just go back and reread it. It's not a long book. So this is a book that is, the story is based on real events that happened in the US in the 19th century, basically revolving around the hardships of slave labor. I don't want to tell you exactly what it's about because I think you should find out for yourself. But this is based on a real thing that happened, unfortunately, because it's horrible. So the story follows a woman in post-Civil War US as she tries to kind of live a normal life, having previously been a slave and gone through that horrible process. It is a story about her and the people kind of close to her and the devastating effects of what slavery does to people and what it pushed her to do to protect her children, but also about even when slaves were free at this time, you know, after the Civil War, that they weren't really free and they have to kind of live with the ghosts of their troubled past and everything that they went through before this supposed freedom. Now, there is a shocking event that leads you to kind of question the morality of this main character. It's done in a very deep and nuanced way, and it's one that just kind of doesn't really have any right answers, so you're kind of left to decide whether her actions were right or not for yourself. One thing to mention is there is kind of a supernatural element in this book, and it's introduced to give a voice to the voiceless. This is what Toni Morrison said in her foreword. She wanted to give a voice to kind of somebody that had died who wasn't able to give their own version of events or have their own opinions on how things turned out. And I understand this intention, but kind of I didn't really enjoy the supernatural part of the book that much, which is kind of ironic considering I'm a sci-fi fantasy fan. But this for me was kind of slightly overly done. It just drew me out of the story too many times. I found it hard to suspend my disbelief on that. I would rather really that we stuck to the very real and very personal parts of the story. When this was focused on, it just felt a lot more impactful to me. And, if one thing that I would maybe have liked is if we're going to keep this supernatural element, maybe just keep it to one person as kind of like a metaphor for the stuff that she's gone through, rather than everybody seeing this supernatural thing and reacting to it, because again, it just slightly drew me out of the story. I understand why she did it, and it's probably just me that feels this way. It didn't make the book bad in any way, but kind of when those parts of the story were in motion, I wasn't as highly invested as when it was really visceral and raw and very real. So to speak of the difficulties that I mentioned before of reading the story, obviously the subject matter itself is one that is always going to be very harrowing and difficult to read. Morrison really doesn't hide from the copious, sordid details of what these people had to go through. You really do find out about it, and she doesn't hold your hand in any way. But also the writing style. So we have like an omniscient narrator who flits about people's heads constantly and their thoughts, and these characters tend to just kind of flick back to memories quite often, just on a whim, with no clear demarcations in the physical book to tell you that this is happening. So it can be quite confusing at times to know where you are in the story, in the timeline, particularly at the beginning of the book where we have no context and she doesn't really again, guide you into it. But it's clearly done on purpose to represent how a human mind works. You might just be doing something, thinking something, and then be like, oh yeah, remember that. And you go into a whole narrative in your head of this memory and how it might affect you now. And especially for one who has a lot of trauma, I can imagine this would happen a lot more. So I found this writing style to be really intelligent, very brilliant, very effective. But I think that's about all I've got to say on this book. I really, really enjoyed it. It was heart-wrenching. There was moments of absolute beauty and soul as well within the relationships that are in this book. The prose is beautiful at times, and the writing itself is just really clever. And this is an important work of fiction, and one that I'll have to return to when I have a bit more brain space. And I would recommend it, but with big trigger warnings, of course. So now I'll talk about my university reads, and because March is a longish month and the way that the lectures landed, I've got quite a few to talk about. So I read 2 stories by Frances Watkins Harper, one called The Two Offers, which was an interesting look into kind of new feminist attitudes in the 19th century and what it means to be a wife in that century. We also read We Are All Bound Together, which was a speech she delivered actually rather than a true story about the importance of intersectionality in equality rights at the time. I read 2 stories from Mark Twain, one called A True Story Repeated Word for Word, which is a story about the complete ignorance of white men to the suffering of slaves, and particularly to those who had the old racist stereotype of the mammy, because they always seem so happy. So the white men just thought, oh, you're always happy, you've clearly had no problems. No. The next one was Talking with Spirits, which was kind of just a really short comical look at the exploitative trend of the rise of mediums in the 19th century. Really interesting and quite funny. I read Henry James, a novella called Daisy Miller, which is about a young girl on holiday in Europe being pursued by an also he's American, but he now lives in Europe, being pursued by him. This is kind of another funny tale about a woman who defies social norms, ooh, naughty, and can seem today as kind of like a feminist role model for what women may become. But it's also kind of, she acted as a personification of the US in the 19th century, this kind of developing nation that hasn't really decided where it fits in the world yet. So really interesting story. I read The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Gilman, which did the rounds on BookTube a few years ago, so I'm happy to have read it. And it was brilliant. And this is kind of a frightening discussion on the mistreatment of women's health rights in the 19th century, just the complete ignorance of how women feel and how they just kind of put it down to women having a womb, stupid things like that. So a really interesting deep look into the psyches of women and their health in the 19th century. Big recommend. I read 2 by Kate Chopin. Desiree's Baby, which is a story with kind of a wicked twist that explores the taboo of mixed race relationships and the resultant offsprings of those relationships. Another one called Regret, which is another feminist tale looking into what it means to be a woman, basically, with another great twist. Talking of great twists, I also read 2 by Charles Chestnut, great name. One was called The Wife of His Youth, a look into the difficulties of being a mixed-raced person after the Civil War in America and the snooty air some of them kind of, grew to try and achieve and gain a foot on the social ladder. And this also has an amazing twist at the end. A really beautiful twist, actually, that kind of warms the heart. And then there was, the last one was called The Passing of Grandison, which was a comedic tale about the stupidity of the attitude of white people assuming that slaves were basically stupid, because my goodness, they weren't. Again, wonderful ending. I really recommend this one, probably the most out of all of them. It really gets into the psyche of what white people thought of slaves and what slaves thought of themselves, with a little dash of humor and a great twist. So let's whip through what I'm going to read in April. So I've already started Equal Rights by Terry Pratchett, a reread for me. If you know me, then you know that Terry Pratchett is one of my favourite authors. Just at the moment, being ill and having so much to do for university with all these exams coming up, I just need something easy to just slip into when I've had a long day of studying and working and whatever. Just 20-30 minutes, slip into here, have a giggle and just feel cozy, because this is a cozy series and just nice as a little palate cleanser, especially after these hard books as well. So enjoying that. After that, and after my exams, I am going to be reading The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell, one of my current favourite authors. And I'm doing this as a buddy read with my buddy read pals, Whitney from Secret Source of Storycraft and Bart from Bart's Bookspace. So ridiculously excited to get to this one. I've heard great things and I love reading books with those two wonderful humans. After that, or maybe during it, depending on how my reading is going, I am going to be reading Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I read a lot of Sanderson last year and I said I needed a big break from him. I'm a decent fan of Sanderson, not the biggest fan, and I'm not a hater, so he's in that middle spot, but I wanted a break. But my wonderful, beautiful wife bought me this book for my birthday in January, and so I really want to get to this because that's a thoughtful, wonderful thing to do. I've heard good things about it, and it is short, which is amazing for Sanderson. It's under 400 pages, so I'm interested to know what he can do in a shorter book. So I'm actually really looking forward to reading this. Next up after that, I will be reading Dust by Hugh Howey, the final book in the Silo trilogy. So I want to knock that off, finish that series, and hopefully it will be a wonderful ending. And then we'll see. We'll see how the rest of the month goes. I have nothing planned. If I get through these 4, I will probably squeeze in something at the end of the month, like maybe a short sci-fi classic or something like that. We shall see. So that's it for the end of this video. If you've made it this far, thank you so much, especially today as I've been struggling through this and maybe just don't have as much pep as usual. Not that I'm ever that peppy, but anyway, thank you for watching. If you've read any of the books that I've read or that I'm going to read, please let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on those. How was your March and what are you planning to read? If you're new to the channel, please think about subscribing. If you liked the video, press like. If you didn't like it, just you know, see you in the next one or whatever. So that is it for now. Thank you again, and I'll see you in another video soon. Goodbye.